The little black boy helped a millionaire with a flat tire. What happened next changed everything. In a city where social contrasts were as clear as the light of a summer day, Malik lived in the shadows. A city divided between chic neighborhoods where opulence was almost palpable and abandoned streets, where poverty was experienced daily, on every street corner. At just 10 years old, Malik had already experienced more pain and struggle than some adults. Motherless since birth, and with a father who never wanted to take part in his life, he had learned to fend for himself very early. Every morning, after waking up in an old, dilapidated room shared with other children his age, Malik would go looking for something to eat. Sometimes it was a piece of bread left in a trash can, sometimes he did small favors for passers-by, carrying heavy bags, washing cars, or even singing for a few coins. His bare feet were still covered in dust, but that didn't stop him from walking with a certain grace. Far from being a complaining child, he was the one who observed, the one who patiently waited for a chance, an opportunity to change his life. He knew his city well. He knew which neighborhoods were reserved for the privileged and which were where hope seemed to dissolve with the dust of the streets. He often passed by these imposing houses, these state-of-the-art cars, these stores filled with glittering windows that he could never afford. But his gaze was not filled with jealousy. He did not feel the bitterness that many in his situation would have felt. No, Malik was a dreamer. A secret dreamer. He stood there on the sidewalk, his eyes fixed on the luxuries he imagined he would never touch, but silently promising himself that one day, something would change. That day, like all the others, he walked the streets, lost in his thoughts. The sun was beating down hard, scorching the city with stifling heat. He was walking near the main street, where the huge buildings acted as impenetrable walls, when an event that would change his life happened. As he walked along a discreet alley, he saw something that caught his attention. A shiny red sports car parked on the side of the street, a flat tire. Malik stopped abruptly. This car was everything he was not, a symbol of wealth, of impossible access for him. He hesitated, his heart racing. On the one hand, he knew he didn't belong in this world, and that his efforts might just be a waste of time. But on the other, something in his instinct told him that this was an opportunity worth seizing. His gaze shifted to the man sitting in the car, a well-dressed man in his 40s, visibly frustrated by the situation. He seemed absorbed in his phone, as if the situation was just a small setback in his day. Malik, a little nervous, approached. He didn't really know what he was going to say, but he knew that if he didn't do something, this might be his only chance to show that he wasn't just another street kid. He took a deep breath and, in a shy but determined voice, he addressed the man. "Excuse-me, sir. You have a flat tire, can I help you change it?" The man slowly looked up, scrutinizing the boy. He seemed a little surprised by the sudden appearance of this kid on the street, even more surprised that he was offering to help. He took a moment to size up the child. Malik's hesitation was palpable, but there was something sincere in his eyes, a softness in his voice. "Do you know how to fix a tire, kid?" the man asked, his tone dry and almost mocking, almost as if he doubted Malik's ability to accomplish a task as simple as changing a tire. He certainly wasn't used to a kid on the street offering him help. People like him were rarely the ones to let themselves be helped. Malik nodded, although he had never had the opportunity to change a tire himself. He remembered blurry images of his father, a robust and resolute man, who, at the time, tended the family car with almost natural skill. Malik, still young, watched intently, memorizing every movement, every gesture his father made to repair what was broken, even if, at the time, he didn't really understand. And then there were the mechanics on the city streets, with their improvised workshops on the side of the sidewalks, where they rebuilt cars with rudimentary tools. Malik had often observed their dexterity, their ability to repair what seemed irreparable. But none of that was worth the experience of doing it. "Give me a few minutes, sir," he replied, his heart racing. The man's gaze was a mixture of doubt and curiosity, but he nodded, not really knowing what to expect. After all, he had nothing to lose by letting this kid try. So Malik set to work, his hands small and clumsy, but full of determination. He knelt on the ground, wrapping his arms around the tire as if fighting against an invisible monster. Each movement seemed almost hesitant, as if his body was still learning the path to trust. However, he did not let himself be discouraged. He had seen older men, much more experienced men, doing this work, and he kept repeating in his head that he, too, could do it. The man, for his part, observed with a form of skepticism, surprise mixed with a certain disbelief. He never imagined that a boy in a situation like Malik's could accomplish such a simple but essential task. The minutes passed, and Malik's effort became more fluid. His concentration was absolute. The man stood up, arms crossed, scrutinizing his work. In less than 15 minutes, the tire was changed. The man couldn't believe it. He stood there, amazed, his eyes fixed on Malik, who stood up with a furtive, almost shy smile. It wasn't perfection, but it was enough. "You know, kid, you're pretty fast," he said finally, his tone softer, a little more surprised. "You're lucky. I never thought you could do it." He smiled, but it was a somewhat forced smile, as if he was trying to play down the situation. In fact, he was impressed, not only by the speed with which Malik had repaired the car, but by this constancy in his work, this energy which emanated from him, as if every gesture he made had a greater purpose. This wasn't just a kid fixing a tire, this was a kid fixing his life. Malik, a little embarrassed by the compliment, simply replied, "It's nothing, sir. It was just what I had to do." His gaze avoided the man's, as if embarrassed by the attention. But he didn't really know what to say. He never sought to be noticed or praised. All he wanted was to be useful, in a simple way. He didn't know how to express to the man that he hadn't just repaired a tire. He had repaired a small piece of his own existence, an act of survival and dignity in this world that sometimes seemed so indifferent to him. The man felt curiously touched by this response. A mixture of gratitude and guilt took hold of him. He was used to people asking him for money or help with simple things, but this kid seemed different. There was no implicit demand, no pressure. Malik had simply done what needed to be done, without seeking anything in return. This shook the man in a way he had not anticipated. He saw in Malik's eyes a form of quiet dignity, a desire to do more, to rise to the occasion, even in a world that seemed to ignore it. "Listen, kid," the man said after a long silence, his voice a little softer now, as if he was trying to find the right words. "My name is Richard." He held out his hand toward Malik, a gesture that seemed almost symbolic, like a silent promise of change. Malik hesitated for a moment, his mind filled with uncertainty and questioning, but something in Richard's intention pushed him to answer. He squeezed her hand with a firmness that surprised even him, a mixture of gratitude and defiance in his gesture. "Will you follow me so I can thank you in some way?" Richard continued, his tone more calm. "I own a business, and I'm sure you could find something to do there." Richard's proposal resonated like a call. Malik had never heard of this company, but he knew one thing. He couldn't refuse such an offer. It was a chance, a rare opportunity that could open doors for him that he had never imagined. So he followed Richard to his car, his heart racing and his mind racing, wondering what would come next. Each step seemed full of promise. The days that followed were a real revelation for Malik. Richard hadn't just offered him a simple cleaning job in his company. He had reached out to her in a deeper way, by helping her reintegrate into a system that he had always seen from afar. The man had even offered him financial support to enable him to return to school, a luxury that Malik had never dared to dream of. But more than anything, Richard had found a mentor for Malik, a man experienced in the field of business management and accounting, ready to pass on his knowledge to him. For Malik, it was the beginning of another world. A world of possibilities that he hadn't even dared to imagine. However, the adaptation was not easy. Malik came from a neighborhood where violence and poverty were daily companions. The idea of integrating into a more prosperous environment seemed almost unreal. Some of his former friends did not hide their skepticism. "Do you really think you'll be able to fit in here?" they often said to him, with a mocking grin. "You're just a street kid. You don't belong there." Each insult, each taunt, strengthened him further. Malik remembered Richard's kindness, the way this man, without expecting anything in return, had taken him under his wing. This benevolence became his driving force. He wasn't going to let society dictate his chances. He had a personal mission. He had to prove that this investment in him would not be in vain. As he grew, Malik poured his heart and soul into the business. He wasn't trying to impress. He worked hard, tirelessly, true to himself. He followed his mentor's advice and used each lesson to build solid expertise. The years passed, and Malik slowly but surely climbed the corporate ladder. At every step, he became a valuable employee, not only for his technical skills, but also for his respect for others and his determined vision. At 18, he was promoted to executive assistant. At 24, he was running an entire department, a role he never thought he could achieve. But it was much more than that. What he had acquired was not only know-how, but also the conviction that his future no longer depended on the circumstances of his past, but on the direction he chose to take. His dream, in silence, took shape. Malik wanted to, one day, offer the same opportunities he had received to the community that had watched him grow up. He had seen with his own eyes that change was possible, that effort and perseverance could open doors. But it also required giving back, creating bridges between those who had everything and those who had nothing. One day, years later, when Malik was about to start his own business, he met Richard in a cafe. The man looked at him, his eyes sparkling with quiet pride, and with a sincere smile said, "I knew you would go far." The words were simple, but for Malik, they carried immense weight. These few syllables embodied not only the recognition of one man towards another, but also the validation of everything he had gone through to get there. Malik smiled back, but in his heart he knew that this moment would never have existed without that day when Richard reached out to him, without that small action that seemed so insignificant at the time, changing a tire. This simple tire change had been more than an act of generosity. It was an act of faith in humanity, a gesture from a man who believed that even those who seemed lost could find themselves. And that's what changed Malik's trajectory forever. Now, by starting his own business, Malik knew that his success would not only be his. It would be the fruit of an unexpected solidarity. He now had the responsibility to reach out, just as Richard had done for him. And this time, he wouldn't let the opportunity pass him by. He knew that every little gesture could make a difference. For him, it all started with a simple act of kindness, and it was this same principle that would guide his steps from now on.